The Brazilian government has declared a state of emergency in 34 municipalities, 26 states and the federal district after over 40,000 new COVID-19 cases were reported in 24 hours. The Dominican Republic is gearing up for the presidential and congressional elections to be held on Sunday. Canada has announced the suspension of the extradition treaty with Hong Kong in response to the Chinese Parliament passing the law on safeguarding national security in a special administrative region. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The Brazilian government declared a state of emergency and public calamity in 34 municipalities, 26 states and the federal district after seeing days of increases of over 40,000 new COVID-19 cases. The National Secretariat of Civil Defence and Protection stressed that the health crisis is critical in the affected municipalities as the population living in poverty has doubled the likelihood of contracting the virus. The announcement comes as Brazil has surpassed 1.5 million COVID-19 cases and seen more than 63,000 deaths. Meanwhile, the National Secretariat also noted that the state of emergency in the federal district was adopted to support local authorities and secure the necessary resources to curb the spread of the virus. Despite the crisis, President Jair Bolsonaro continues to insist on the reopening of the economy and the easing of restrictions. The head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, Carlos Ruiz Massieu, presented the quarterly report on the situation in the country this Friday, highlighting concern over continued internal violence. In the framework of the peace agreements and amidst the COVID-19 health crisis, the report notes that illegal armed groups have taken advantage of the lockdown to strengthen their control and increase violence in those communities where the state presence is weak, which require infrastructure and services to guarantee residents' safety. The UN official also stressed that despite the call for a ceasefire, the assassinations of social leaders and human rights defenders, as well as former FARC guerrillas, continues. In this context, the official reported that advances are needed in the comprehensive program of guarantees for women leaders and human rights defenders.
Unfortunately, in this period, the trend of killings of former FARC guerrillas has continued, which represents a high concern. The Secretary General is concerned when we have already reached more than 200 assassinated former combatants. We are particularly concerned about those areas outside the so-called new zones of reincorporation, which extend beyond 500 municipalities. There are about 75 new areas, according to information from FARC, and there is a greater risk and vulnerability in terms of security in those areas. Also mentioned is the importance of the approval and financing of the protection schemes, and also greater advances in the comprehensive program of guarantees for women leaders and human rights defenders, especially given the situation faced by social and human rights leaders, who are also signatories to the peace accord. The report also highlights the importance of the interinstitutional support for the prosecutor's Special Investigation Unit to advance in the judicial processing of the intellectual authors involved in those crimes, and for those institutions to also advance in the effective capture of the people behind the attacks or assassinations.
Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez offered an update on COVID-19 figures this Friday. Rodriguez reported 204 locally transmitted cases and 60 imported COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours. 48 cases were imported from Colombia, 4 from Brazil, 2 from Peru, 1 from Ecuador, and 5 were people who had contact with others who had returned from abroad. The Venezuelan official also noted that the total number of cases identified now stands at 6,537, of which 4,378 cases remain active. The Attorney General of Venezuela, Tarek William Saab, announced that his office has initiated criminal proceedings against those directly implicated in the theft of Venezuela's gold reserves deposited in the Bank of England. During a press conference on Friday, the Attorney General noted that the prosecutor's office had called on the competent court to issue an arrest warrant and freeze the assets of those citizens who make up the criminal group that awarded itself the right to illegally represent Venezuela internationally. The Attorney General mentioned several individuals, all members of the so-called ad hoc board of directors of the Central Bank of Venezuela, the illegitimate body appointed by opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó. In a meeting of the temporary working group to combat COVID-19, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel highlighted the crucial role of scientists in the fight against the pandemic and their contribution to decision-making. The president pointed out that research has revealed the degree of aggressiveness and the characteristics of the novel coronavirus, which has sparked the collapse of health systems in several countries and has facilitated the identification of appropriate actions to tackle the pandemic. Díaz-Canel stressed that once again science confirms that we cannot afford to be overconfident, even as the country is moving towards recovery, and called to rigorously maintain measures and implement the de-escalation of restrictions gradually in order to prevent complications. This Friday, Cuban legislators debated with their counterparts of the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament on issues of interest to the region. During the Parlatina virtual meeting, lawmakers assessed the update of the model law on firearms, ammunition and related materials aimed at making the region more peaceful and secure for its people. Participants agreed on the need to update the model law approved in 2008 in line with the current context in the region in order to serve as a reference for local legislative bodies. Cuban legislators also participated in the debate of the Parlatina Committee on Citizen Security, Combat and Prevention of Drug Trafficking, Terrorism and Organized Crime. This Friday, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Keith Rowley, announced that the island's general elections will be held on August 10th. In a speech, Rowley told legislators that he had advised President Paula May Weeks to dissolve Parliament at midnight this July 4th. He also informed that nomination day will be held on Friday, July 17th. In the last general election, held in 2015, Rowley led the People's National Movement to victory over the People's Partnership Coalition.
On this day, July 3rd, 2020, I am to advise all my colleagues in this House that I have advised Her Excellency the President to dissolve this Parliament at midnight tonight. That being so, Madam Speaker, as per our Constitution and the arrangements of our acts, nomination day, Madam Speaker, would be Friday. Nomination would be Friday, 17th of July, and polling day would be August 10th, 2020.
And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Dominican Republic, all preparations are now in place for the presidential and congressional elections to be held on Sunday. The security of the polling stations is now passed to the military police, responsible for preserving order before, during and after the vote. On Thursday, the Central Electoral Board ordered the reinforcement of security at all its departments and at polling stations, a process that will fall on the shoulders of 64,000 officers deployed throughout the country. Meanwhile, there are increasing questions surrounding the alleged theft of 37 million Dominican pesos from the Electoral Board in Santiago. Director of Elections Mario Núñez stated on Thursday that in terms of security, the process is safeguarded through the measures and specific guarantees for each election, and that the case of Santiago is under investigation, but that citizens should not let this concern them in the lead-up to the vote.
We have to learn how to live with this situation while it lasts. And if I am in the colonial zone right now, I understand I can also vote on Sunday.
I will vote depending on how the virus situation continues. Otherwise, my life comes first. My health is the first thing for me.
And after the end of the national emergency in the Dominican Republic, which was in effect for more than 100 days to prevent the spread of COVID-19, only 23 of the country's 101 major resorts reopened their doors on July 1st. According to Dominican tour operators, the region of the country with the largest opening of hotels for July will be Punta Cana Bávaro, which will end the month with 27 hotels open, while 9 more will reopen in August. As part of a gradual return to operations, the eastern region of the country will have some 50 hotels open by November. Activities will also be progressively resumed in the beach city of Puerto Plata. Spanish health authorities have warned of a risk of smaller COVID-19 outbreaks among seasonal agricultural migrant workers. Over 3,000 new coronavirus cases have been reported in Spain's northern regions, which host seasonal agricultural workers. According to a report by the Por Causa Foundation, over 400,000 migrants without residency and work permits are currently living in Spain and are particularly vulnerable to the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, over 400 new COVID-19 cases have been reported in the last 24 hours across the country.
The fact is that between 50% and 60% of those who have arrived here are people without papers. Obviously, when you have such a high percentage, and even if it was only one, these are people absolutely condemned to continue in a situation of social exclusion, vulnerability, and at risk of having their rights violated. And that's the first problem and the first big frustration that we face.
It's because of the coronavirus that nobody's working. I think it's the fault of the virus. Many who were working as hawkers or who had jobs are now unemployed. For example, there are many people I know, compras, who have no papers, who are working as street vendors, and they had no other choice to come here, because normally here they will be hiding anybody, whether one has papers or not. There can always be a farmer, someone who takes too many risks for whatever reason, but that's always at one's own expense and will. What I do think is that the regional and national governments should make a decision on the issue of illegal migrants, whatever it may be. If you want to regularize them, you are welcome. But if they think that their situation shouldn't be regularized, then these people have to go to the immigration office and apply properly to stay or return to their country. I don't think it's that difficult.
Austrian Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg noted on Friday that the government is still analysing the lifting of a travel ban on the Italian Lombardy region. The announcement was made during a meeting with his Italian counterpart, Luigi Di Maio, to address the European Union's economic recovery plan.
As far as the Lombardy region is concerned, as I said previously, I wish and I hope to succeed in lifting this advisory, which is advising not to travel towards Lombardy. We are working to proceed in this direction. We will have to liaise with our health institutions, but as soon as the numbers will allow us to do it, we clearly will allow travel again. But what we have to understand is that at a global level, and especially in Europe, we are not yet out of the pandemic. We are having issues in the Western Balkans and in other states. We can't relax. We can't lower the measures aimed at avoiding a new spreading of this virus that hasn't disappeared yet.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the suspension of the extradition treaty with Hong Kong and other commercial measures this Friday in response to the Chinese Parliament passing the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Despite claiming to support the one country, two systems principle, the move by Canada is a clear act of political interference in China's internal affairs.
After studying the legislation and its impact, Canada will treat exports of sensitive goods to Hong Kong in the same way as those destined for mainland China. Effective immediately, Canada will not permit the export of sensitive military items to Hong Kong. We are also suspending the Canada-Hong Kong extradition treaty and updating our travel advisory for Hong Kong. Canada is a firm believer in the one country, two system framework. We will continue to support the many connections between Canada and Hong Kong while also standing up for its people. In the days and weeks to come, we're also looking at additional measures, including around immigration.
And more than 20 countries have welcomed the adoption of the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region by China's top legislature during the 44th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The total number of countries who support China's adoption of Hong Kong-related law has risen to more than 70. During Wednesday and Thursday's UN sessions, the representative of Russia firmly supported China's implementation of the one country, two systems principle, saying that Hong Kong affairs are entirely China's internal affairs. North Korea, Venezuela and Cameroon also voiced firm opposition to the use of Hong Kong or Xinjiang to interfere in China's internal affairs. Meanwhile, representatives from Ethiopia, Ivory Coast and Madagascar all said the UN Human Rights Council should follow the principles of objectivity, impartiality, depoliticization and non-selectivity in order not to politicize or adopt double standards on human rights issues. Chinese authorities announced on Friday they will ban the live poultry trade after the Xinfadi wholesale market was identified as the source of a fresh coronavirus outbreak in Beijing.
We should strengthen the supervision of food safety in key places such as agricultural markets. Take Beijing's Xinfadi market as a warning. Focus on investigating the potential safety risks of agricultural markets and deploy measures to strengthen the management of food safety risks in key places such as agricultural markets and wholesale markets. We will severely crack down on the illegal trade of wild animals, prohibit the consumption of wild animals, restrict the trade and slaughter of live poultry, encourage localities where conditions permit to promote centralized slaughtering of live poultry, and gradually abolish live poultry market trading.
In the next step, the Ministry of Commerce and other departments will further increase market support for agricultural products and improve the level of software and hardware construction. At the same time, China will promote the legislation of agricultural products market.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed on Friday that the era of expansionism is over during a surprise visit to India's northern border region, where a military incident in June put a strain on diplomatic relations with China. Addressing Indian troops stationed in the area, the Prime Minister claimed that human welfare is the reason for India to increase its military strength on land, water, air and space, and noted that bravery and courage are a prerequisite for peace. Indian and Chinese authorities have conducted talks to ease tensions following the death of 20 Indian soldiers in the Galwan Valley in June. Nigerian authorities have received a donation of personal protective equipment to support the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic in the country. The donation was delivered to the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 by the Nigerian Diaspora Organization on Friday. The items donated include reusable coveralls with shoe covers, face masks and hand sanitizers. Nigerian health authorities have reported a total of more than 27,000 coronavirus cases and a death toll of 628. Local officials reported on Friday that armed men had killed at least 30 people in Mali in simultaneous attacks on several villages in the centre of the country. The attacks took place on Wednesday in the Bakas region, but were not immediately confirmed because of the difficulty in accessing information from the area. Officials did not immediately blame any group, but central Mali has become one of the flashpoints of the country's conflict, with regular jihadist attacks and intercommunal fighting between different ethnic groups. The attack left at least 30 dead, including women, children and the elderly, while many are missing. Hundreds of people attended the funeral service of 8 men in Guinea's capital, Conakry, on Thursday. Opposition figures have claimed they were murdered by security forces during a rally against President Alpha Condé.
Today, nearly 200 young people under the age of 20 were murdered at close range. That's dramatic. But the other tragedy is that there is never justice. There is not even compassion on the part of those who are supposed to protect citizens. There is total impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, and it continues. This Alpha Condé power is killing the Guineans, thinking they will discourage the others. No. We are going to bury these people. Tomorrow again, July 8th, we are going to come out again. We are going to come out to demand democracy, to demand freedom, to demand justice for our friends who have been coldly murdered. The responsibility to return our country to the people is now the contract that will bind us to these martyrs, and we must stand firm, for their souls to rest in peace, so that they didn't die in vain, so that we can honor and do justice tomorrow. Because justice must be done for all those families and all those martyrs.
Prime Minister of the Ivory Coast, Amadou Gon Coulibaly, returned from France on Thursday after 2 months of absence due to medical treatment. The Prime Minister was received at the airport by Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. Amadou stressed that he was back to take his place alongside the President to continue the task of developing the country. On May 2nd, the PM travelled to France for treatment for a heart condition. He previously underwent a heart transplant in 2012. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.